am just thrilled to be your host, Diane Gatsis Havinga, and I have a wonderful program for you today. And I'm going to introduce our two guests, and then we'll go right into our discussion. Most of you, I know Miriam Gento. She does not have her harp with her today, but that's okay. And she's with the Village Church, and next to her is another Village Churcher, the pastor of Village Church, Jim Bell. And we're going to continue this discussion Miriam and I had a couple months ago about art and worship, and can we call it art, and what is art and what isn't, and how did this all kind of start? And I thought to set the stage for our discussion, I would read something that I found when I was home. I think it was at Easter, and the church there had this, I'm not even sure this thought, how's that? And it's why iconography. Living as we do in a society that demands that our lives be lived at a fast pace and with very little quiet time, the icon beckons to us to slow down. The stillness of the icon draws us into the quiet so that we can lay aside the cares of this world and meditate on the splendor of the next. The benefit of the icons are to guide us in meditation, quietness, and in guiding the heart to prayer. And I have one example that Miriam brought with of an icon for those of you who want to see it. So this kind of, we spend a lot of our first program on icons, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but some people look at this and it's a form of worship. Other people would say, oh, that's a nice piece of art. And that's how we're going to start. How's that?
That's a great place to start.
So with that in mind, we have lots of show and tell today.
Yes.
And we're going to try to not dwell on just the Christian faith. We're going to touch on some of the other faiths as best we can. But I'm thinking, Jim, you brought along some of your vestments.
Well, I actually brought these because in the Christian tradition, the liturgical colors are very limited. There's green during most of the year, which is called the ordinary times, and then white around Christmas and Easter, and then violet around Lent and Advent, and red, which is used very, very seldom, but Pentecost and in many Protestant churches on Reformation Sunday. And then there are a few denominations that use black on Good Friday. A lot of other denominations would leave the altars, bare that day. But I think if we only limit ourselves to those 5 or 6 colors, that's too limiting for a real celebration of all the variety. So I just brought some of my vestments to say, there are other ways. I actually don't know what you'd wear orange for, but I've worn it. The other side of this says celebrate, so it's a good celebratory. This one just, you can't see it, but it has the Greek letters for the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And then this one I got as a gift because I did a lot of work with the National AIDS Network some years ago. And I got that as a gift, and it's great to wear on certain days, and I always wear it when I read the story of Noah and the rainbow.
Well, there you go. Here, why don't you pass the middle one first, and I'll hold that up as we continue the discussion. Okay. And it kind of leads into kind of why the early churches, and I would even think temples, started this whole concept of creating objects. I'm not going to call them art objects right now, but objects. And that goes into that whole thought process of it was really used to help instruct and teach people.
Mm-hmm. Right. So in many ways that's true. Like, for example, the stained glass windows in some of the cathedrals, when people couldn't read, that's the way they learned the stories, right? They would look at the windows. And in this case also, we have symbols. If you look at some of the symbols, there's a some grapes on this
yeah.
side. And so,
Yeah, here they are.
okay. So, you know, by looking at that, you think, oh, well,
And
there's wheat and there are grapes. And in the Christian community, that would be for the Lord's Supper, where we celebrate, you know, by drinking the wine or the juice and taking a piece of bread. So those symbols are there to remind us of that. Alpha and Omega also, because in the Bible it says that, you know, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. And so you have the symbols there. So symbols are very powerful. But a lot of times people need to be taught what those symbols mean. You know, let's explain this is what these are. For example, you know, the symbol here, there's a rainbow theme, right? You know, it harkens back to Noah and the story of the ark. And then in present day, there are other connotations for the rainbow. And then that one over there has this celebrate. And then the colors invite you to celebrate. So symbols are important if you know the stories behind them.
Right. Were you going to add to that, Jim?
No, I was going to say there are lots of visual symbols, but also the things that go on in the context of worship too, like the blowing the shofar for the Jewish community. That call or that time that you blow it to let somebody know that, you know, something important's coming right now. In the same way that you ring bells in the Roman Catholic Church, and I don't know about the Greek Orthodox, but
Well, they have bells used sporadically depending on the church, but the call to prayer also for the Islam faith, of course, when you're in any of the Eastern countries, I mean, that goes on continuously throughout the day. And the Buddhist religion uses the bells as a call to prayer, or the end, or to start a meditation, to end a meditation.
Right. So art is something that appeals to us visually, but also we can touch, right? And we could hear. You know, so it's a way to use all your senses, your entire body, as a way to get closer to God, to focus when you come to worship, or if you're doing private worship in your own private devotions at home, you can use, for example, I know you brought some beads, or you can use art that you yourself can create. I brought some examples of ways to focus yourself, praying in color. You can just kind of do some doodles there as you try to focus yourself. So I think the arts are just a way of using your senses to come closer to God. And in some churches, incense, the smells also are a way to bring the fragrance in and up to God.
And with the incense, it's the idea that you're being sensed, but the prayers go up, so I mean, the incense goes up as your prayers would go up to God. So, and you did mention beads. So I brought some of these actually. I made, I don't know, it's been a while. And there was a specific reason in terms of how many beads there are and separating them. These are made out of, you know, I guess glass, and these are more wooden type beads. And they are a way to, again, focus on prayer. And then one that I wear a lot, this is a prayer bracelet. And there are, I don't know how many beads, to be honest. There may be as many as 50, but you have one link, and sometimes it could be just a bead, or it could be a cross. It really just depends. And so the idea is that you would take each bead and you would either pray or as a way to calm yourself down.
Is there a specific prayer that you, for each bead?
It would be basically the same prayer that you would, you know, a very short prayer. Now, my mother, when she was alive, swore by these. Whenever she got nervous, anxious or anything, she would start the prayer and go around. And and I have used it, especially at night if there's something that's troubling me, to try to calm myself down. And so here's one. And then I'm wearing, these are Buddhist prayer beads that my sister brought back from her trip. I don't know, I can't remember if it was India but anyway, so, and they are, again, used to help focus, and I have, because I'm not that familiar. So with the Buddhists, this would be used to help you keep track of how many breaths or the metta that you are reciting. And it could be something as simple as just repeating the Buddhist name. But surprisingly, every religion uses some form of beads in their prayer, which I found quite fascinating from, like I said, the Buddhist faith, Hindu, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, the Benign faith, and of course in the Catholic religion you have the rosary that people would use. And there are a particular number of beads that you use. And they say that the beads were among the earliest human ornaments dating back to 10,000 BC.
Very interesting. You know, you mentioned as you were talking about that, the breath or counting. So that is another way that we also can, although it's not a visual art in the sense of colors and all that, but dancing and movement is another type of art that helps us sometimes, if we're watching, you know, help us maybe interpret a song, but ourselves, we can do breath prayers. You know, you could breathe in and have a phrase that you breathe in, you know, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And use that as a focus. And you don't have to have a tactile, a bead or something. If you don't have that, you could use your own breath as a way of focusing yourself. And in your case, like when you were saying about your bracelet, anxiety or fear or anything at the moment that's just overwhelming you, that's when you breathe in and breathe out. And a lot of people that practice meditation on a regular basis, you know, they have that way of centering themselves by using breath. And you might want to talk about how dance also, we recently had that experience at the Village Church.
Yeah, I to be honest, was thinking more today about the way we use arts in corporate worship. We've done that a few times. John Carl, a resident here, put together with a dance group an interpretive dance to one of the hymns, and did that one Sunday. And we've had sometimes in reading scriptures where there are numerous speakers in it, rather than just get up and read that scripture, we've actually assigned it, and we'll have 5 or 6 people reading the parts as they come along, so that, and people hear it differently if they hear different voices. You know, if they hear the prodigal son speaking, if they hear the older son speak, if they hear the father speak, as opposed to you just reading this and saying that. So, and then of course we've had a lot of instrumental people come in. We often think of the organ, the choir, the piano, but there's lots of others. You know, there are a lot of musical instruments that can be used.
When you mentioned the dance, it occurred to me in the Orthodox wedding ceremony, there is a dance that is conducted with the priest, the bride and the groom, and the best man or best woman, and they go around the table 3 times, and they recite prayers. The bride and groom have 2 candles, white candles. The priest is holding, their hands are joined together. The priest literally takes their hands and guides them around as they, you know, do a prayer. And it goes back numerous years, but I can't remember the exact reference as to why we include that dance. So
another thing that we do in corporate worship is like on Palm Sunday, we have in our first hymn people coming down the aisles waving the palm branches, and I just think that when we gather, in my childhood, we came out of a background in which silence in worship, even when church had enter in silence, depart to serve, that's not the worship of today. The worship of today is let's celebrate, let's be joyful. David danced before the Lord, let's rejoice before the Lord.
So when we get back to the topic of art in worship, so what makes like a particular song so-called a worship type song versus non? I mean, we heard at the beginning Aretha Franklin doing her rendition of Amazing Grace. Most people would consider that song religious, but there are lots of people who have performed that song and, have sold that music. And that's not within necessarily a religious concept.
Right.
Well, it was really interesting because on Father's Day, our organist, as her offertory piece, played a very contemporary song, Dance with My Father. And I don't think any of us would have ever thought about God until here it's put in the context of worship, and it suddenly changes the whole meaning of what you're hearing.
I think there's a fine line between sacred and secular music. There are times when, for example, Aretha Franklin singing Amazing Grace out of the context of a worship service, it's still a sacred piece, but you're in a secular setting. But the other way, you can get a secular piece that people are familiar with, like Dance with My Father, and use it in the setting of worship, and then it becomes, in a way, sacred, even though it's not completely originally meant for that. But so I think it's the intent. True confession, one time I actually played many years ago during a communion a portion of a worship service, I played Stairway to Heaven. So I'm just saying that, I didn't rock out. For those of you that aren't familiar, it is a rock and roll song by Led Zeppelin of, heavy metal. But the beginning of it is this beautiful minor key, very contemplative, and I used that. And there weren't too many people in the congregation that recognized it. One or two later went, that was Stairway to Heaven, and kind of called me out on it. But I, as a musician, I feel that, you could bring in music, and if it's in a worshipful setting, and if your intent is really to serve God, I don't see a problem with that. And Amazing Grace, interestingly enough, it is originally an Irish tune. It's not necessarily, we've co-opted it as a hymn,
right,
but it was not originally. And many of them are like that too. Be Thou My Vision, another beautiful hymn with beautiful words. It's an Irish tune. So who's to say what's sacred, what's secular? I feel like it's.
Well, I think it's important to bring in those hymns though, because my son said to me one day, we were talking about music in church, and he said to me, Dad, there's not a single place I go except on Sunday mornings where the latest tune we sing was written in the late 1800s.
That's right.
Well, there you go. And I want to point out one other thing. So we were talking earlier, so I brought, and many of you I think have seen me wear my cross, and I have several crosses, but this was a cross that my mom and dad gave me when one of our trips to Greece. And I think it's just a beautiful piece of jewelry to a certain extent, and it's one of my favorite pieces of jewelry. But to me, it's more than that, and what makes it a cross is that when we returned to the States, I brought the cross to the priest and said, will you hold, bless this cross? And so he would do the same and I recently did buy an icon. And after I bought the icon, again, I brought it to the priest. And what they do is they take it inside the altar, and it's there for 40 days. And they have blessed it, and then they return it to me. So to me, when I was preparing for this, I went, well, that I think answers the question. So you can take a piece of jewelry, and then it becomes, in my opinion, more. It becomes more of a religious object versus here's an icon I bought in Greece. It's neat. I'm going to put it up on my wall because it's kind of a nice painting. Versus no, this is used for me to help focus and pray. So I'm not sure the vestments would be the same kind of.
Probably not. But you bring up a good point, because for us, the symbols, this cross is important for you. It's been blessed, but it was also given to you by your parents. So we give, the symbols have meaning in and of themselves, but we also bring, we give them meaning. Based on what they mean to us, we give them meaning. So it will be more important to you, that cross, and it will always be a way to remember family, remember a specific time. It also leads you to remember your faith. Well, it wouldn't have that meaning for me because it wasn't something that was given to me. So symbols are important, they're strong, but they're also given meaning by the corporate worship, and corporate meaning the body that comes together to pray and worship, but it also they are also given meaning by your personal experience with them.
Can we touch on, for a little bit with the remaining time we have, kind of the difference between prayer by yourself versus if I can pray anytime, anywhere, why do I need to go to a church or a temple or a meditation group?
Well, I don't think you need to be honest. The difference for me is the whole sense of community, that there are a lot of things I can do by myself. I can cook by myself, I can eat by myself, I can do a lot of things by myself, and they have meaning. But I also can do it corporately. And for example, I can confess my sins, or we can have a corporate confession of all the sins we have in common that we lift up. I think the whole focus of corporate worship is to say the community has come together, and we are trying as the community to do many things we could be doing individually.
Yeah, I don't think that, like you said, you have to do anything. But I think there is, when you come together with other people that have similar beliefs, you feel supported. You feel that the way you see your faith is something that other people share, and you have a community. That's not to say that you can't have your own private devotional time and do it on your own. I think when you come together, the ecclesia, the church, the Greek word, it means to come out of your everyday life and come out as a group. And in our case, as Christians, we're celebrating worship and remembering Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. We're also just joyfully then going out into the world to follow the way that Jesus would have us follow in the Christian context. So there's no right or wrong. I think it's what feeds you and where you find that nourishment for your soul.
I do know with meditation, I can actually last, I'll say last in quotes, a lot longer when I'm with a group of people. I can meditate for 30 minutes and usually, and have a good experience when I'm with a group of people. When I'm by myself,
A lot of distractions.
there's a lot of distractions, and it kind of depends on certain things. But I do find it a lot easier when I'm with a group of people,
Right.
which
Right.
I guess kind of goes the same in terms of whether or not you're praying in church versus by yourself. So we have limited time left, so let's get back to our original question, and I'm going to just have you give me your final thoughts. So art and worship, is it separate? Is it the same? Is it, who cares?
Well, it's really interesting at least in the Christian tradition, where you have the very simplest, for example, the Amish, who don't even have a place to worship. They go to somebody's house because they see themselves as the community, or to churches that have huge cathedrals where you come. And I like both ends of it. I like both ends of it. I really like it when the church pulls out all the stops and just has a grand and glorious processions, loud music, all this sort of stuff. But I also like the quiet, meditative, just God is here where it is we're gathered.
Miriam?
I have to agree. I mean, I think there are different ways of worshiping depending on where you are. And Sunday morning can be pull out all the stops and do glorious, but then there are other times when you just want to have that quiet retreat out in nature, just go for a walk, and talk about art. I mean, nature is art. You just look at the mountains or a beautiful flower, and you can't recreate that, but yet it's there. So art and worship, or art is worship? I don't know. We're going to answer that question. I'll let our viewers continue to grapple with that.
All right. And before we were doing this program, I had been working on the service for the 21st. And our opening hymn is a hymn that starts off, "In the bud there is a flower, in the seed an apple tree." And I was thinking about, in one individual there's the worshiper, in all of us there's the congregation.
There you go. And we'll just touch on the fact that then you have the human body, and a lot of religions will consider the human body a temple for God.
Right.
So, and we haven't been able to, they've been trying to, but well, this has been very interesting, and once again our time is up, so I want to thank Jim Bell and Miriam Gento from the Village Church for coming and taking their time to try to figure out that answer, and we're just going to leave it as that, and you figure it out for yourself. How about that?